Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Wednesday, March 26th, 2025. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, the U.S. killed 25 civilians in 1 week of Yemen bombing. So U.S. airstrikes on Yemen killed at least 25 civilians and wounded 28 others in just the first week of the Trump administration's renewed bombing campaign. And this is according to the Yemen Data Project, which tracks airstrikes in Yemen. They started doing so when the Saudis were waging their war on Yemen. And their numbers are the conservative estimate. They use mostly, as far as I understand it, open source data, but they cross-check and really confirm the casualties, the civilian casualties that they then report. So consider this, probably a low estimate of civilians killed. And the Yemen Data Project released this report on Tuesday, analyzing 38 strikes on Yemen that the U.S. launched from March 15th to March 21st, and they found that 55% of the bombings hit non-military targets. The report said the U.S. attacks marked the heaviest and deadliest week of bombing in Yemen since the final months of the U.S.-backed Saudi UAE air war on the country in early 2022. And in January 2022, I linked to a story that I wrote up at the time, citing the Yemen Data Project's numbers, that January 2022 was the most violent month for civilians in Yemen since 2016. So it was a particularly violent time in this war. And now they're saying that the rate that the U.S. is bombing Yemen is on that scale, or at least was in the first week. So you see this picture from a girl who was injured in the first round of U.S. airstrikes that they launched starting on March 15th. So the report found that more civilians were killed in the first week of the Trump administration's bombing campaign than were killed in the 12 months of U.S. and British strikes on Yemen that were conducted under the Biden administration from January 2024 to January 2025. The YDP report said the deadliest U.S. strike in the first week of President Trump's bombing campaign hit a residential area in Yemen's northern Saada province, killing 10 civilians, including 4 children. Another 11 civilians were injured, including 2 children. So they have some pretty good graphics here about the types of targets that were hit. The Yemen Data Project said that 21 out of the 38 recorded U.S. strikes hit non-military civilian targets. They said that civilian targets included a medical storage facility, a medical center, a school, a wedding hall, residential areas, a cotton gin facility, a health office, Bedouin tents, and Al Ayman University. Only one of the strikes was confirmed to hit a Houthi military target, and in 16 of the strikes, the target could not be identified. So those were 16 of them, they couldn't identify them. And I know, there's a lot of, it looks like they hit a lot of residential areas, residential buildings. And I know the U.S. officials told the Wall Street Journal that they were trying to target Houthi officials in their homes. Same thing Israel's been doing, of course, in Gaza, targeting Hamas guys when they're home with their families, and they did that in Lebanon as well against Hezbollah. The report, they recorded U.S. strikes every night in Yemen between the hours of 7 p.m. and 6 a.m. from March 15th to the 21st. And the U.S. has continued daily airstrikes in the country this week. And then some background here that we've been going over so much. Just the important point here is that the U.S. began bombing Yemen after the Houthis said that they would reimpose the blockade on Israeli shipping. It was before they actually launched any new attacks. But this is, being kind of sold as a war to defend shipping lanes, when in reality it's a war to defend Israel and ensure that Israel could continue waging its genocidal war on Gaza. All right, so the next one here, more U.S. airstrikes hit Yemen's northern Saada province. So they've been really hitting Saada, which is in the north, which is where the Houthis kind of come from. And Yemeni media reported that more U.S. airstrikes on northern Yemen's Saada on Tuesday night as the U.S. continues its daily bombing campaign on the country. A local official told the Yemeni news agency Sabah that 2 U.S. airstrikes targeted the Sahar district in Saada. And early Wednesday morning Yemen time, more U.S. airstrikes were reported. 3 more were reported in the same area. Yemen's health ministry also released a statement that said recent U.S. airstrikes that targeted Saada hit a cancer hospital for the second time, injuring 2 people. You see this picture here. This is of a boy who was wounded by U.S. airstrikes in this area of Yemen. The picture is from Tuesday, March 25th. And the U.S. has launched dozens of airstrikes on Yemen since March 15th. I go get into more background again that we've been talking about a lot. And of course, now everybody's talking about Yemen more now since this leak, or whatever exactly it was, of the Trump administration officials texting their war plans and including Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic in the chat. And as a lot of people have pointed out, you see the reaction from Democrats, from kind of the mainstream reporters. It's like people are more upset about the fact that this leak happened than the U.S. bombing Yemen. So the next one here, Trump defends Waltz amid fallout from signal texts on Yemen. This is an article from CBS News. So President Trump on Tuesday defended National Security Advisor Mike Waltz as his administration faces questions about its use of the encrypted messaging app Signal after a reporter was mistakenly added to a group chat detailing highly sensitive plans to attack Houthi targets in Yemen. Mr. Trump told reporters at the White House that the information that was discussed on the 18-member group chat, which included high-ranking officials like Vice President J.D. Vance and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, was not classified, and said Waltz is a very good man who will continue to do a good job. Trump said, quote, "I don't think he should apologize. I think he's doing his best. It's equipment and technology that's not perfect, and probably he won't be using it again, at least not in the very near future," end quote. Speaking to Fox News' Laura Ingraham on Tuesday night, Waltz called the situation embarrassing and said that he takes full responsibility, adding that he built the Signal chat group. However, he claimed that he did not have Goldberg's contact information on his phone and is unsure how Goldberg's number got there or how Goldberg got into the chat. So he's claiming that he didn't have Goldberg's contacts. He just ended up in the chat somehow. And so this comes after, as I mentioned yesterday, there was a reports that they were looking that Waltz might get fired for this. And I mean, if you look at that chat, he's all, very gung-ho about bombing Yemen. He's a total hawk. He always has been. So I think it would be good if he was fired, although who knows who he could be replaced with. But it looks like that's not going to happen. And this is a line that we're seeing from Pete Hegseth, from Tulsi Gabbard, is that, this wasn't classified information, our plans to bomb Yemen. And I think nothing should be classified by the government, but I'm sure that realistically they would consider something like that classified. But there's just a lot of weird things to this story, and I know, as some people have mentioned, some people suspect this was all intentional and some kind of psyop, but I am struggling to figure out what the point would be to leak something like this. I think it is just completely embarrassing for the administration. It goes to show that they launched this war basically on, even though they didn't sound super confident in their reasoning. I mean, you had the vice president saying that he thinks it was a mistake. He's framing it as if the U.S. was doing the bombing for Europe, when that's just, that's not the case. Obviously, this is about Israel and what's happening in Gaza. But he did mention that the, much more trade for Europe goes through the Suez Canal and everything. And other people have pointed out, which I forgot, that Goldberg was an IDF soldier. He was actually an IDF prison guard. So it's not a surprise that he decided to keep other information that he got in that chat secret, and that he took it upon himself to leave the chat and didn't wait, and he waited until after over a week to report on it instead of trying to stop. If I was in a similar situation, I'd publicize that information right away, even if it's not confirmed that it was them. So maybe you would be able to stop the U.S. from bombing Yemen. But of course, Goldberg doesn't think like that. So lots of weird, strange, there's certainly a lot of questions about this whole situation, but it looks like Waltz will survive. All right, so the next one here, Israel kills 62 Palestinians in Gaza in 24 hours. So Gaza's health ministry said Tuesday that Israeli attacks killed at least 62 Palestinians and wounded 296 in the previous 24-hour period as Israeli strikes continue to pound targets across the Strip. The health ministry's numbers account for dead and wounded Palestinians who arrived at hospitals and morgues. The ministry wrote on Telegram, quote, "There are still a number of victims under the rubble and on the streets, and ambulance and civil defense crews cannot reach them," end quote. Medical sources told Al Jazeera that at least 23 Palestinians, including 7 children, were killed by overnight Israeli attacks, overnight Monday into Tuesday. And that included strikes on displaced Palestinians sheltering in tents. And the health ministry said that since Israel restarted its genocidal war on Gaza on March 18th, at least 792 Palestinians have been killed and 1,663 were injured. Save the Children said that at least 270 Palestinian children had been killed by Israel over the past week. The Israeli military issued fresh evacuation orders for Palestinians in northern Gaza, threatening attacks on the northern cities of Jabalia, Beit Lahia, Beit Hanun, and Shajaya in Gaza City. The IDF also ordered the displacement of Palestinians in areas of southern Gaza. So more forced displacement. The UN says 125,000 Palestinians have been forcibly displaced since the last Tuesday when Israel ramped things up. You see this photo here. These are Palestinians fleeing from Jabalia in northern Gaza. Another thing that happened in northern Gaza, there was reports of the rare anti-Hamas protests. There was videos on social media that showed Palestinians marching and calling for an end to Israel's genocidal war. And also there was some chanting against Hamas, saying Hamas must get out. It looked like a few hundred Palestinians were involved in these protests. And there's messages shared on social media that also called for more protests to be held in different areas of Gaza on Wednesday. And Gaza's health ministry said in its update that its total recorded death toll since October 2023 has reached 50,144, and the number of wounded has risen to 113,704. Gaza's media office has said that nearly 62,000 adults and children have been killed by Israeli violence since October 2023, a number that accounts for missing Palestinians, and other estimates that factor in indirect deaths put the death toll in the hundreds of thousands. So, before the ceasefire, I wrote these daily updates of the violence in Gaza every day. And now, I've covered the horrific violence that's happened in the past week. But now, as it just continues, just getting back into the habit of doing the daily, this many Palestinians were killed in Gaza today by this U.S.-backed Israeli bombing campaign. It's kind of depressing to get back into that rhythm. All right, the next one here, Hossam Shabat's last article. So this is from Dropsite News, and they published, this was an article that Hossam Shabat, the Palestinian journalist killed by Israel on Monday, was working on with Dropsite News, and it's about his experience, what he saw on the ground when the bombing restarted, and more details came out about his killing. The IDF admitted to killing him, saying that they targeted him in his car. The accusation is that he's a terrorist, which is there's just absolutely no evidence. And he's been reporting on this, since October 2023. And, he has such a big online presence. It's just, he was a journalist, and there's no denying that. So Israel intentionally targeted a journalist. And so this is his last report. I'm just going to read it. And I think the first report that I read of his from Dropsite News was called the Death March from Beit Lahia. He stayed in northern Gaza. And, as I covered a lot on this show, the last few months leading up to the ceasefire, Israel was carrying out this horrific campaign in northern Gaza. where they ordered everybody to leave under threat of death, whether by military action or starvation, imposed total blockades on these areas. And the IDF went in there and just demolished all the buildings. And he stayed there the whole time, and he survived all that. So this is his report. Beit Hanun, Gaza. The night was dark and cautiously quiet. Everyone fell into an anxious sleep, but the tranquility was quickly shattered by deafening screams as the bombs rained down. The wails of neighbors announced the first moments of the resumption of Israel's military campaign. Beit Hanun was plunged into panic and terror. Cries of distress rose amid the screech of the shells in a scene that reflected the magnitude of the disaster engulfing the city. This was only the beginning. The massacre of entire families quickly followed. Columns of smoke rose everywhere. The bombing did not cease for a moment, drowning everything in a relentless hail of fire and suffering. The Israeli attack is continuing. The occupation is practicing its brutality with unprecedented bombardment, leaving behind horrific scenes of destruction and bloodshed. According to the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, the number of martyrs over the past 6 days has topped 700, reflecting the degree of such immense human suffering. OSHA also reported how Gaza is suffering from a severe shortage of medicines and medical aid, exacerbating an already dire situation. In the first 6 days of this renewed military operation, northern Gaza witnessed 4 bloody massacres. The most notable was the Mubarak family massacre, which took place as the family was gathering in mourning to offer their condolences to Dr. Salim Mubarak. In an instant, their collective grieving was turned into a sea of blood and body parts. The entire family was killed. Dr. Salim, his wife, his children, his parents. No one survived. One eyewitness summed it up plainly. They were all killed. The victims were not on a battlefield, but in a house of mourning. It was a crime in every sense of the word. This massacre was not the only one. It followed by successive attacks on other families, including the Abu Nasr family, then the Abu Halim family, bringing to mind the vicious bombardment in the very beginning of the war after October 7th. The aggression is ongoing, relentless, targeting innocent civilians indiscriminately, leaving behind only destruction and death. When I arrived at the scene, I wasn't ready for the horror before my eyes. The streets were filled with the dead. Under every stone lay a martyr. Dozens were crying for help from underneath the rubbles of their homes, but there was no one to respond. Screams filled the air while everyone stood helpless. My tears didn't stop. The scenes were more than any human being could bear. The ambulances were filled with corpses, their bodies and limbs piled on top and intertwined with each other. We could no longer distinguish between children and men, between the injured and the dead. Just really brutal stuff. And, this, of course, all sorts of accounts like this across Gaza, especially that night that Israel restarted the bombing. All right, the next one here. Israeli airstrikes kill 6 in southwest Syria. This one's from Jason Ditz. So Israel continued its ground invasion of southwestern Syria on Tuesday, but encountered some resistance, the first time it faced any meaningful opposition since invading in December. It came in the form of locals who reportedly fired on Israeli troops in the area around the town of Kouaya in Dara Governorate. Sorry, mispronouncing things. The Israeli troops were entirely unharmed, but not only did they return fire, they called in an airstrike against the group. Israeli tanks in the area also reportedly fired at the area, and at least 6 people were killed in the incident. Some reports say 7, and a number of others were wounded. Syrian state media refer to the slain as civilians, while some in the Israeli media called them terrorists, of course. Their identities are yet unclear, though all indications are they were residents of the area where the clash took place. Syria condemned the Israeli attacks as a blatant violation of national sovereignty. And it looks like, this is part of these Israeli troops are pushing further and further into Syria. And this could be the start, seeing the locals fire at invading Israeli troops. This is something, it could lead, there could be more resistance to this Israeli invasion and occupation of southern Syria. And this is all, of course, supported by the U.S., which is supplying the weapons and the bombs to the Israeli military, which is not only destroying Gaza, but also occupying southern Syria, occupying southern Lebanon, and engaged in these military operations in the West Bank. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. issues demands to Syria for sanctions relief. So this is another one from Jason. So there's reports now that the U.S. sent Syria a list of demands and offered partial sanctions relief if they complied. A lot of the details are still emerging, but the demands include disposing of chemical weapons, forbidding foreign jihadist fighters from senior government positions, and appointing a liaison to help the U.S. look for Austin Tice. The chemical weapon demand may be a difficult one to comply with at a satisfactory level. The Assad government had already disavowed chemical weapons for over a decade ago, and in 2017, the U.S. accused them of a chemical attack, of course, one which the Assad government denied, but Trump bombed Syria over that one. And the OPCW actually confirmed in 2013 that Syria destroyed its chemical weapons, but the point is basically we don't really know if there's any chemical weapons left in Syria. Israel's been claiming to be bombing chemical weapons, which doesn't really seem like a responsible way to dispose of chemical weapons. So the other demands, the foreign jihadists, they want to keep them out of senior positions. The fact is that the HTS-led government has appointed foreign jihadists to senior military positions. So there might be some issues there. And then Austin Tice, he's an American journalist who went missing in 2012. That's a long time ago. There's been, his body hasn't turned up or anything, but I don't know, where he could be. But the U.S. Wants to find him or find his body, and this is something, wonder, you see this guy, Adam Bowler, who's the U.S. hostage envoy guy, just went over to Afghanistan and spoke with the Taliban. This is one area where it looks like this Trump administration is willing to engage with anybody to get Americans home. So maybe we'll see him fly over to Damascus or something like that. So the sanctions relief that the U.S. is actually offering looks incredibly minor, only including a 2-year exemption allowing transactions with Syrian government institutions, and a report that the U.S. would issue a statement in support of Syria's territorial integrity. Though a statement of territorial integrity might be something of value to Syria since Israel is actively invading and occupying their territory, history suggests that a U.S. statement would have little backing behind it and presumably would not include any criticism of the ongoing Israeli incursions. All right, so the next one here, U.S. intelligence says that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon. So U.S. intelligence agencies have reaffirmed that there's no evidence Iran is developing nuclear weapons or that Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has reversed his 2003 fatwa that banned the production of weapons of mass destruction. So the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, told the Senate Intelligence hearing, quote, "The IC continues to assess that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, and Supreme Leader Khamenei has not authorized the nuclear weapons program he suspended in 2003, end quote. So Gabbard's comments were based on the annual threat assessment, which is released by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence with input from all U.S. intelligence agencies. The report did note that there have been more calls inside Iran to reverse the ban on nuclear weapons, which have grown in response to Israeli aggression in the region. And that is true. We've seen members of the Israeli parliament, certain media outlets kind of calling or questioning the policy prohibiting nuclear weapons in the face of what Israel's been doing in the region, and now all these threats from the U.S. and Israel. But again, still no indication that there's been any kind of decision or that the Ayatollah is even considering reversing this policy. The report, this is from the threat assessment report. It says, quote, "In the past year, there has been an erosion of a decades-long taboo on discussing nuclear weapons in public that has emboldened nuclear weapons advocates within Iran's decision-making apparatus. Khamenei remains the final decision-maker over Iran's nuclear program to include any decision to develop nuclear weapons," end quote. The threat assessment comes amid increasing U.S. sanctions and threats of military action over Iran's nuclear program. Iranian officials have rejected the idea of talks with the U.S. in the face of Trump's maximum pressure campaign, but they say the door is open for indirect negotiations. So despite all the hype, no evidence that Iran's trying to get a nuclear bomb. Just keep that in mind as we see kind of the war propaganda ramp up. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. brokers a Russia-Ukraine Black Sea truce. This one's from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So after holding separate talks with Russian and Ukrainian delegations, the U.S. announced that both sides had agreed to allow commercial shipping through the Black Sea, mirroring a similar arrangement established earlier in the war. According to a Russian statement on the deal, Washington, Kiev, and Moscow agreed to the restoration of the 2022 Black Sea Grain Initiative. The statement says, quote, in accordance with the agreement between the presidents of Russia and the United States, both sides have committed to implementing the Black Sea Initiative. This initiative includes guaranteeing safe navigation in the Black Sea, refraining from the use of force, and prohibiting the use of commercial vessels for military purposes while establishing appropriate control measures through inspections of such vessels, end quote. So the 2022 deal was meant to allow Ukraine to export grain and Russia to ship fertilizer through the Black Sea. The Kremlin withdrew from the pact in 2023, saying that Western sanctions were preventing Russia from exporting its products. Under the deal that was announced on Tuesday, Washington pledged that it would help Moscow's exports reach buyers. The agreement was made after American officials spoke separately with Russian and Ukrainian officials on Monday in Saudi Arabia. So while the renewed truce marks a major step towards President Donald Trump's goal to end the war in Ukraine, Zelensky said that if Russia breaks the deal, he expects the White House would ramp up arms shipments to Kiev. And he's made similar comments before about this deal to halt attacks on energy infrastructure, which seems to be in effect. There's been, they've both sides have kind of accused each other of not living up to the deal, but in the last couple of days, it seems like that deal, the energy infrastructure thing, is supposed to at least be in effect. So hopefully this is another step toward a real full ceasefire and an end to the war. There are kind of a lot of discouraging signs. All right, so the last one here, Oscar-winning Palestinian director released from detention. This article is from Al Jazeera. So Hamdan Balal, the Palestinian co-director of the Oscar-winning documentary No Other Land, who was detained by the Israeli army after being attacked by settlers, has been released. In a post on social media platform X on Tuesday, his fellow co-director Yuval Abraham said, quote, after being handcuffed all night and beaten in a military base, Hamdan Balal is now free and is about to go home to his family, end quote. The Associated Press said that its journalists had also seen Balal and two other Palestinian people leaving the police station where they were being held in the Israeli settlement of Kiryat Arba in the occupied West Bank. Balal had bruises on his face and blood on his clothes. Balal said that he was held at an army base and forced to sleep under a freezing air conditioner. He said that he was blindfolded for 24 hours. Lee Tessamel, the attorney representing the three men, said that they received only minimal care for their injuries from the attack and that she had no access to them for several hours after the arrest. She had earlier said they were accused of throwing stones at a young settler, allegations that they deny. And I mean, there's videos of them being attacked by settlers, Israeli settlers who are throwing stones. So basically what happened was they were attacked by settlers. Well, this actually says what happened. So on Monday, around 24 settlers, some masked, some carrying guns, and some in military uniforms, attacked the occupied West Bank village of Susia in the evening as residents were breaking their fast during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. Soldiers who arrived pointed their guns at the Palestinians while settlers continued throwing stones. Lamia Balal, the director's wife, said that she heard her husband being beaten outside their home as she huddled inside with their three children. She heard him screaming, "I'm dying," and calling for an ambulance. When she looked out the window, she saw three men in uniform beating Balal with the butts of their rifle and another person in civilian clothes who appeared to be filming the violence. And she said, quote, "Of course, after the Oscar, they had to come attack us more. I felt afraid," end quote. And, this incident's getting a lot of attention, as it should. But, I mean, this type of stuff happens just, all the time for Palestinians living in the West Bank being terrorized by these Israeli settlers. And, I mean, it looks like this documentary, this film is really bringing a lot of attention to that. And it's just absolutely criminal. Obviously, it goes without saying that it's criminal what these settlers are doing. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Scott Horton, Escalating an Unwinnable War. One from Andrew Day, Mahmoud Khalil, Viewed from the Right. That's at the American Conservative, which has been publishing a lot of great stuff lately. So critical of this crackdown on civil liberties in the name of, on behalf of Israel, essentially. They've also published good stuff about questioning the bombing of Yemen and all that. One from Ted Snyder, Mainstream Media Criticizes Ceasefire Negotiations in Ukraine. Don't believe them. One from Lawrence M. Vance, America Should Side with No One. And one from Jose Nino, American efforts to separate Russia from China are doomed to fail. So please go check all that out. Help us with our fundraiser. We have matching funds right now, so every dollar that you donate will be doubled. We're also a nonprofit, so your donations are tax deductible. And we're 100% reader funded. This is how we put out this content for you. So if you appreciate the show and antiwar.com and you have the means, please go to antiwar.com/donate to help us out. I did a couple of great, good interviews today. I was on Due Dissidents. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with them on their YouTube channel. So that's up. It was their live stream from Tuesday. I did like the first 40 minutes or so of it. And I also recorded with a guy named Preston Sprinkle, who has a podcast called Theology in the Raw. He's an evangelical Christian, very renowned, New York Times bestseller, selling author, has a PhD, and he is opposed to what Israel's doing in Gaza. And for that, he's gotten kind of a lot of heat for it. So he had me on. He listens to this show, so that was cool. That should come out soon. I'll let you know when that comes out. But that was a cool interview to do. Anyway, that's it for me for today. If you can't help out with the fundraiser, you could also always support us by sharing the show, liking, commenting, subscribing, retweeting, all stuff like that. Follow us on social media, Facebook. Not Facebook. We are on Facebook, but we don't really do anything there. Instagram, TikTok, and X. Anyway, I'll be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.